In January 2001, a BBC documentary crew filmed the everyday goings-on in a typical workplace. Now, nearly 22 years later, we return to find out what has happened to the employees of The Office. Of course, The Office is not actually a documentary, but rather a brilliant TV mockumentary series. And just like any other piece of media, it stands as an excellent primary source of the time and place that produced it. The guys from the Wernham Blogg podcast were gracious enough to join me this summer in dissecting this groundbreaking British TV series. Take a listen. EPS podcast, where everything is a primary source. I'm Eric Paul. You can find the show on our website, www.epspodcast.club. You can go to Instagram. That's where I'm most active, and on Patreon. Patreon.com. If you like what we're doing here, be sure, as Neil Godwin would say, give generously. And that brings me to the topic of today's episode. This is going to be a new one for me because I've never spoken to anybody internationally. And I have right now James and Danny from Wernham Blogg, which is the Office podcast. And it's all about The Office, and I'm going to say The Office, not the UK Office, because it's the original, and we're going to be talking about the Ricky Gervais, Stephen Merchant show as a document of its time period. So welcome to my show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Cheers, Eric. Thanks for having us, man. Glad to be here.
No sweat, it's what I do.
Yeah. This is us on a 6. Yeah.
Yeah.
I wonder if we give ourselves a challenge of going through the entire podcast in just Office quotes. Like, we don't actually say anything original and just all speak,
Pressure. Not always easy, is it?
All I'll say about that is sometimes an amateur will stitch up a professional. So.
Yeah.
I'm mad enough without the gear.
Get him done and get on with the show.
Yeah. Get me on Parky.
Yeah.
Man, to be fair, it's hard not to have a normal conversation without doing The Office.
Right.
Your show's kind of all about the whole pop culture thing, and to be honest, it's one of those things where the quoting is literally one of the biggest parts of it. It's hard to imagine if the show wasn't so quotable, whether it would be like kind of influential in the way that people, like, literally for us, without exception, it has shaped the way we are as adults. Right,
he's turned up at my house early when I've said drinks at 6, at 7. Right. And he sat there at 6 o'clock, and I'm not even home till 1:30.
But I just not realising I just said it as a quote. But to be fair, if you're organising a party and you say to people, drinks at 6, party at 8, or party at 10, it's fairly.
It means I've got to start every party in my life at 6 an hour early.
I was just at trivia the other night, and I'm always thinking of, the trivia episode and that you're just referencing right there. And I so badly want 4 non-blondes or, No Doubt to come up and be like, these bloody 4 non-blondes, so you started the podcast just a couple years ago. What was the reason behind that? Why did you want to?
We kind of started in 2014. No, 2018.
2018.
Yeah, sorry, 2018. So we started in 2018. And it was basically just because I found another podcast for another show that I liked, Bottom. I don't know if you get that over there. It's Rick Mail, Adrian Edmondson. No, it's really good. Look it up when you get home. And it's one of those shows that is just very, very cult. And there was this podcast that was going on about it. And I thought, I could talk about this all day long for The Office. And so could my friend Danny and a couple of other friends. So I had a lurk and couldn't find one. Right? I just couldn't believe there wasn't. Yeah, there wasn't another one. Right?
Unbelievable.
There was no one had done it. So I thought, let's just try it. We'll give it a go and see what happens. And it was kind of, we weren't really sure about it to start with because we just thought, oh God, people are going to get slaughtered online with this. People can be pretty nasty online sometimes. Mm-hmm. So we were lucky to have kind of a bit of a group on Facebook because a few years before that, in 2014 or maybe a bit earlier, we started a group on Facebook, which was just focused on quoting The Office. Yeah. Like the meme culture and all that kind of stuff. And so we kind of had like a kind of primed audience for it, really, where we could share it. And, there was, all these people were quoting with us saying, these funny guys.
Yeah.
What else you got?
Yeah.
And so, we did that.
They're having a laugh while getting the job done.
So we just did it, and it went down really well, and it was mostly just this kind of small cult following, and we got a group of our friends and their friends, and before we knew it, we'd done both series because we blazed through it, right? I mean, that's the thing. The American Office is so much longer, but in the UK, we've only got really 14 episodes to play with. So before we knew it, we were done. And
and we ended up interviewing the cast as well, some of the cast, and Ewan McIntosh, and then Stephen Merchant and Ricky Gervais. So
you've gotten Ricky on the show.
We've had Ricky, we've had Steve, because we were the first people to do a UK Office podcast.
Because he and Stephen and they got into podcasting pretty early on in the media, medium.
Oh man, they were like the trailblazers, man. Did you listen to all of those that I said, right? All of the old XFM shows and stuff, and that was kind of define the genre in a way, right? Of podcasting, or not the genre, the medium. They were like the first people to do it, and the first people to do it with comedy, and it all kind of just gone from there. I honestly don't think we are. And in fact, I think I said this to Steve or Ricky, I can't remember which one, that I kind of feel like podcasting wouldn't be what it is today if it wasn't for those early shows.
Right. It's true, because there's so many kinds. There's the ones that have like the true crime ones where they have like, the violin music in the back in between every little thing. And then there's, the analytical ones and the conversational ones. That's the ones I go for too. Like I really got into a show called Star Wars Minute, where they just go through every Star Wars movie by the minute. And I guess you guys could do that too with the Office and the extras.
Pretty much do. And we recorded 4 hours of material.
One episode
to get a 1.5 hour episode, about a half-hour episode of TV.
One episode we did. We literally were talking for about 4 hours. It was the training episode of series.
What am I going to do for 4 hours?
It was literally. I remember you complaining about it at the time. We had to cut you complaining out of the final cut, right?
Yeah.
But it was really funny. But it's just again, that's one of those episodes that there's just so much to talk about. How can you talk about a 30-minute episode of a TV show for 4 hours?
Right. But it can happen because and that's the genius of the show, is because it stirs up so many just comparisons. Like I've done that before. I've been in those kinds of situations. I can relate to that. And I remember when I was in a training session, I thought of this, and it's easy to do 4 hours on, because
I think
Tim's expressions,
It almost feels like we're in it now. It feels like it's not just a TV show. It's something that actually happened in my life now. It feels like I've worked in that office.
It's so true. I think you hit the nail on the head as well there, man, when you're saying like it's something that we can all relate to. I think that's why, more than any other show, The Office is kind of one of those things that people can relate to, because even if you've not worked in an office, everyone knows a David Brent, everyone knows a Gareth, everyone knows a Tim, and everyone's been in love with a Dawn at one point in their life, right? So it's kind of, it speaks to us on a level that kind of most shows don't, because it's part of being a person, particularly in the 20th century.
Exactly. And I think that's in my opinion, that's the best form of humor, is when it's so paper thin away from reality that it's hard to differentiate. The very first time I came across The Office, I was watching on I was flipping through the channels. I came across, we have BBC America here, and it was, and on my description on the TV it just said The Office, and it had a brief description, Gareth Investigates, and I was like, oh, okay, this is just some documentary about an office place. And it wasn't until like a few minutes into it that I'm like, wait a minute, I think this might be scripted somehow, or an actual actors. And then when I realized that, I was blown away, and I was addicted, because I was like, this is the most brilliant thing. And I'd watched, and I love like Spinal Tap and Waiting for Guffman and all those Christopher Guest mockumentaries. And I know Ricky Gervais does too, and that's why he follows those rules about mockumentary making, is that there's certain things the camera's not always privy to everything,
And that's important, right? Because the camera becomes a tool to be used in these set pieces within the show. So in so many moments, like you mentioned before when we were talking, you haven't seen The American Office, but they don't really kind of bake the form into the plot. Right. Whereas in the UK office, you've got these moments that literally couldn't happen unless it was a mockumentary style, like Tim taking his mic off and then, declaring his love to Dawn. And you've just got this kind of like radio silence completely when that's taking place. And it's like, I think when we were talking to Steve, he said that's his favorite moment of the whole show, because it's kind of, it's so raw, and it breaks everything you've seen from any other TV show. So
and you say about thinking for a first minute it was a genuine documentary. It had me fall for a good episode and a half, because or maybe half an episode, because seriously, around 2001 in England, for the few years before that, there'd been loads and loads of shows like that, like docu soaps, and some of them were like Driving School and
He's not going to know about that.
In Britain, we've had a trend for a few years of like docu-soaps with with a fly on the wall documentary, and some of them were quite outlandish and ridiculous. So The Office, it didn't actually seem that unlike a slightly more extreme version of them. So it had me fall for quite a while.
Because it's that kind of, it's always the kind of, they're always quite character-led, those shows, right? Because the people that are directing them and the producers, they always kind of, they know that the successful fly-on-the-wall documentary shows are the ones with a bit of an eccentric main character that they can follow around. Yeah. I don't know if that's the same over there. Did you guys have like a wave of these shows before The Office?
There was a few, like MTV had a few shows like The Real World and Road Rules, where they followed people around. But there was a setup to it, because especially with The Real World, MTV paid for them to live in a house, and it would change a different city every season. And
it's like Big Brother.
Yeah, it's sort of like Big Brother. And we had that too. I think we still have that, but the first season of Real World, I liked it a lot because it was legitimate. Either it took place in New York and there was actual real New Yorkers, or people who had moved to New York specifically for, like, they had jobs and stuff, and they would get up and they would go, and you'd see some of them just hanging around the house, or they would go about their everyday lives. But by the time I stopped watching, they were living in like what looked like Barbie's dream house. Like they had all this, and so it wasn't real anymore. It was all set up, and it seemed like every episode they had a party, and and it just got to the point. And over here, reality shows really took off in the late 2000s because of the writer's strike. In Hollywood, there was a writer's strike, and so a lot of the scripted programs stopped being made. And they were like, well, reality shows don't really need writers, so we can just, put a camera and follow the Kardashians around, or, whoever. But I noticed after the popularity of The Office, and then when it came over, then every show started to do that mockumentary style. And
it's like the new laughter track. It's blown the laughter track away. And it's, instead of the laughter track, you've just got this kind of look to camera. Right. And it's like a shorthand for a punchline these days. And
it's gotten a little bit out of hand too, because you have, again, shows that I'm like, okay, I could see a documentary, a short documentary, or maybe they're at a small town Parks and Rec office for a month, and just follow and I've watched documentaries like that before too. But when it's years upon years, I'm like, that's not, it takes away the legitimacy of it. And so that actually kind of goes to the first question when analyzing anything, primary source wise, is the material it's made from, and how is it made? So the material, like you said, is working in an office, which by the time we're at the turn of the century, would you say that's a good part of the British workforce was, a decent size perhaps, that could relate directly to that kind of environment for their workplace?
Definitely, yeah. I mean, obviously it looks a bit dated now because of COVID and working from home. It's kind of made it a bit of a period piece. But yeah, when I've worked in offices exactly like the one in The Office, and it's that kind of mundanity and just seeing the same old faces, and all you've got in common with them is the fact you walk around the same bit of carpet for 8 hours a day.
I love that line too.
It's so true though. But yeah, to be honest, for us, we were
existential, and that was a very turn of the century thing as well. The kind of existential theme that appeared in a lot of popular culture, like Fight Club's another example of it. That that sense of what are we doing with our lives?
Awake but asleep in my life.
Sleepwalking through life, and it's all meaningless. Whereas I think nowadays the world's in such a mess that actually people look back on it and think, actually, I wouldn't mind just plodding along doing a little office job and being secure in my job.
Also, I think
so it's weird now. Yeah, at the time
you in particular. We've been quite happy with that one.
At the time, it seemed really secure. It seemed really like, oh, this is awful, a grey, drudgerous life. Whereas now it's like, oh, yeah, I love that life. Instead of worrying about having to pay 5 times as much for my gas and, recession and all that stuff.
Let's not bring the tone down there.
Bring the tone down. Yeah.
The opening sequence of The Office it sets the tone so perfectly. You just got this drab looking, suburban, office park setting with the cars going around in circles and, just.
I've actually worked in Slough as well.
Oh, did you? Okay.
Yeah. And
he's interviewed Ricky and Steve, but his claim to fame is that he used to work in the town.
I used to work in Slough, and that roundabout doesn't exist anymore. They've replaced it with a traffic light junction. So
it went the other way because it seems like
a bit of heritage.
You know what I find interesting that you like The Office, right? Because for us, it's kind of there's something really kind of British about it in terms of the pensive relationship between Tim and Dawn and the kind of unspoken chemistry and stuff. Whereas that feels to us very kind of Jane Austen, very kind of British, unspoken, stolen kisses sort of business. But in America, I get the impression, based on American TV and culture and stuff that I'm aware of, that kind of stuff doesn't really get time of day. It's a lot more out there and like even in the American Office, they pretty much declare their love for each other within like the first series or something. I think, and it's
and
much
then they
bigger
go on and they have a relationship and they're and they're going on dates out in the open and
and ultimately it becomes a huge happy story in the American one, right? Pretty much every character has this blissful ending,
right?
Spoiler alert to anybody that hasn't seen it, but in the UK one, it's just tragedy after tragedy.
Right.
Every climax of every series, obviously, until the end. But I don't know whether that's a British thing.
I think it does, and I've heard other people kind of analyze it that way too, and compare the two side by side, and talk about how the roads really did divide pretty early on for the two programs, and by the end, it is that very optimistic American, ending that we all want, and then in the British version, it's just, well, this is actual reality. This is what would happen, and especially. I mean, you see the writing on the wall with David Brent almost immediately when you first meet him, because you're like, I don't know how this guy's going to keep up. And, he might have been okay in that job 20 years earlier, but new century, new millennium, he's just not, that kind of, kind of slimy boss kind of character. Just his
no good in a crisis.
Time's coming. Time's going to be ticking quickly for his time there, as the boss. But and I got to make sure that my listeners don't think that I'm poo-pooing American comedy shows or anything, because I love most of my favorite shows are from over here. But this style of show, I think, it was just masterfully done, and in true. One of, I think, the pitfalls of American pop culture is that when something's a hit, when something does well, we just go all in. And that's what happened with The Office. I remember I was in like a pub or, bar when the first episode of The American Office aired, and I was watching it and I couldn't even hear it, but I'm like, that's the exact same episode as the British one.
Yeah.
And a couple of days later, people were talking about it, like, oh, that show's so good. And I'm like, yep, just gonna be a matter of time. And lo and behold, 8 years later, it's still on. I'm like, they didn't know when to say when, like they just had to. And I feel like the British one speaks to, like you said, that British cultural, of showing restraint, not always just everything's out in the open, everything's, loud and boisterous all the time.
Also, we get a lot of our influences from America, right? Like a lot of our sort of cultural stuff comes from there, whether it's like Sam and Diane and Ross and Rachel. We're conditioned over here, as is the rest of the world who watches these shows, to sort of, believe that there's going to be a happy ending, everything will be all right. And granted, in the very, very, very final scenes in The Office, they did give us that huge cathartic release. But in the build up to that, you never saw it coming, because it was just like, it was just knockback after knockback. You'd end every series thinking it's the last series, thinking, fuck. It's the reality of life, right? You don't always get the girl. You don't always get the job. Sometimes you get fired. Sometimes you get fucked over by people. And then, so yeah, that was the big thing, was that it just completely broke preconceptions you've got about TV and happy endings. And then they give us this final ending in the Christmas special, which just, I think that's why the Christmas special was so special for so many people, because they didn't feel it, they didn't see it coming.
Right.
And I think the other thing is Ricky and Steve probably genuinely weren't sure they were going to get a second series. They genuinely weren't sure whether they were going to bother making a third series. So that's why the end of each series is potentially just the end of it. But yeah, either way, it would have been a lot grimmer.
And that's a nice segue to the next question, is who made it and what was their role or status in society? You know, we know now, and I always feel like I know Ricky Gervais before he became popular in America. You know, like everyone in America is like, oh, there's that British guy that's always, you know, putting everyone down at award shows. But I'm like, I liked him before you guys did. You know, and the two of them really were working, you know, stiffs. Like they I know that he had, you know, Ricky was in a pop band in the early 80s, but by the time, you know, the 80s and early 90s, yeah.
I didn't still valid though.
The first time I saw that photograph of him, I'm like, that's him. And then the eyes is what gives it away.
For Steve. Oh right, yeah. Sorry, you mean Ricky, yeah.
You know, he's just like, but they were not. And I think that's part of the problem, is that a lot of time that's how it comes across so real, because they lived that life themselves. Like they worked at a radio station together, and so they didn't know if this thing was going to be a hit. And it right away, right? It took a couple of years before
it did. The first series was kind of quite cold. It didn't really hit the heights, but the second series is when it kind of took off. Yeah, for sure.
It was shown during the summer as well, and like in July and August, which is traditionally where you know, that's where kind of back in those days, certainly that wasn't where you put a show before it was going to be a hit. You wouldn't show it in July and August.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it kind of got ignored. There wasn't much publicity around it. Didn't even get that good reviews, actually.
No, it didn't, not to begin with.
I did 40 Towers, and look at that now. So yeah, don't trust a little reviewer.
So in terms of their background, so Ricky had a face on TV. He did this Meet Ricky Gervais show, which was, you know, a bit of a kind of panel interview.
There's that face again.
He did his interviews. He had famous names like Peter Purvis and Jimmy Savile were on his show.
Peter Purvis.
He was on the 11 o'clock.
That's show. Right. Yeah, he did that. And he wrote for like Bruiser and a few other things and that kind of stuff. But before that, he was just like worked in an office, right? So I guess that's where a lot of his kind of character and inspiration came from. Merchant, obviously, being a lot younger, fresh out of uni at Warwick.
Keyboy, basically, at XFM, wasn't he?
Yeah, and well, yeah, he worked with Ricky on the XFM show and did a bit on the BBC World Service, and he I think he was behind the camera doing like
the World Service or something.
He was just like, there was a short pilot called CD Boss, which was kind of the genesis of the character, and I think that was kind of what gave him the foot in the door with the BBC.
Yeah,
and that was a really early incarnation of Brent. I think we talked about it in one of the episodes.
That's when he introduced Karen Mode. It's basically a proto version of that.
Yeah, because does he like put on lipstick or something? I remember seeing it, and it's really, really creepy, actually.
It is creepy, right?
And in the final version, he gets that little sample of the deodorant from the magazine, doesn't he?
But that's a really good example of how they toned that character down, because CD Boss was the title of that short, and they really just lived up to the name, right? Because it was not Brent like we know him. It wasn't the chilled out entertainer. It was this creepy, seedy, nasty boss.
Chilled out though. There's nothing chilled out about David Brent. That's the thing. He's a mess. He's a mess of anxiety.
No, that's true. I know, but I'm talking about his
chilled out. People who say they're chilled out are never chilled out. That's one of the immutable laws of life.
Okay. That's true. That's true.
Anyone who says I'm chill, I'm like, okay, you're not chilled out. If you say you're chilled out,
all right, fine. But yeah, to be honest, so again, we spoke to them both, right? And we spoke to Ricky first, and we were like blown away by the fact that we had this some chat with this guy, and we were like proper screwing about what to say to him and how to talk to him, what questions to ask him. And there's lots of threads on Reddit about that interview that say things like, there must have been a condition in the interview that they weren't allowed to talk about Steve or anything like that. But that really wasn't the case. We just we're aware of this kind of what feels like animosity between them online these days. Like they don't talk about each other. They don't even acknowledge each other. So like it's really weird and really a massive shame, right? Because they were such a brilliant force together, but for some reason they don't even acknowledge each other. And I had a question to ask Ricky about what happened and all that. And I kind of was just feeling him out. But to be honest, like we kind of bottled it. We didn't ask him the question about Steve, just based on the way the conversation was going. But when we interviewed Steve, we thought, fuck it, we've already had Ricky, we've got Steve now, done. So we waited till the end of the interview, and then I just said to him, look, I can't remember how I phrased it. I think I just said something like, would you ever get back into bed with Ricky or something stupid like that? And he basically went on to say, you know, he'd love to work with him again, and the magic between them was around like how Ricky was really kind of loose and like, you know, loose-minded around stuff, and Steve was a bit more studious, and yeah, they were just a magic pair, really.
It's kind of it is a shame. And I remember, and with some of their more recent stuff, especially Ricky's stuff, you can tell there's something missing, you know, with Afterlife and stuff. It's a great show, but that you can always see the presence of Stephen Merchant with that. And I think that both of them, though, really showed that they had fingers on the pulse of ordinary people, you know, like that just, you know, get up in the morning, go to their jobs and, you know, go about their lives and stuff like that. My brother, he studied in England around 99. So just before the show came out, and he was in London for a semester. And then he did an internship at a publishing house. And actually the first thing, when he came home, the first thing he told me about was the 11 o'clock show in Ali G. That's all he wanted to. He's like, there's this guy. You know, that's like like as soon as he got off the plane, he was like, there's this guy Ali G. And but then when The Office came on a couple years later, and he saw it, he's like, that looks pretty much like where I worked in London. He's like, and he loved it for that reason, because it was so familiar. You know, he's like, that's right on. And they filmed it in an office, right? An actual office suite.
Yep. Slough trading estate, and it's been not only as a roundabout.
No. Didn't
the office has been demolished as well. I mean, they should be World Trade Center. They should be, you know, they should be protected. They should be grade 2 listed. They should never be demolished.
Hang about. They didn't record it in an office though. They made the set. That's what Ewan told us.
Oh, okay, I thought they'd actually filmed in an office, because didn't Ricky say that they were telling him to be quiet?
I don't remember.
And then it was a miserable office next door.
Or maybe he did.
I think some of it was actually filmed in an office.
I'm sure he said
Slough trading estate.
He said they had to make it and build the set, but maybe I can't remember.
Yeah, I think it was filmed in a genuine office. Genuine office.
Yeah. Let's talk about it first.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and I do think, like, even beyond the UK, I think, the experience of just going into a grade dreary job and a grade dreary office, I think that's fairly universal, which is why it's gone around the world.
I was going to say, there's got to be something about it, because it's gone everywhere. It's like the most remade show ever. Like, there's every single country has got one.
Spain's got one, you know, it's everywhere.
I think it's that and Wheel of Fortune are like the two most remade shows, or, you know, maybe Family Feud or one of those game shows. And it makes sense, because especially after the Second World War, there was such a change in most of the developed world's economies. You know, like in this country, especially after this, you know, a little bit after the First World War, and then definitely after the Second World War, you had all of these returning GIs that, you know, most of them were conscripted. A lot of them were conscripted, so they weren't, you know, professional soldiers. They returned to civilian life, but they had the training of being able to take orders and work as a team. And so a lot of times when the economy started to rebuild itself, late 40s, early 50s, they were primed to work in an office type setting. And a lot of times their sergeants were now the foreman or the managers in their office, and they were working there, and they could do a really good job with that stuff.
Yeah. And they give a man a lethal blow.
Right. Territorial.
You're in your office, these are behind you, coming really hard.
Yeah.
Would you take him out?
I mean, if it does have to be a cold, then so be it. Some of these people wouldn't survive in the wild.
Different frogs, different times.
Yes, sorry.
Was it similar? Was it similar in England after the war, as far as the restructuring of the economy in that way?
Don't mention the war. I mentioned it earlier, and I think
I was so hoping that somebody would do
that. I don't know, man.
We kind of had a bit of a similar track to America. We had a kind of post-war boom. But then, we had manufacturing for ages, and then in the 80s, we became more of a service economy. So I think, from the 80s and 90s onwards is when, people stopped going down the mines and started going more into sort of office type jobs. Yeah. So, it became more sort of relatable. We stopped making stuff and started providing services. So yeah. So yeah.
That many more generations of, at least 3 or 4 generations, maybe 3 of people that, that's part. And you're absolutely right before. I mean, COVID just blended that all up and spit out a whole new kind of, economic system now, where the labor force isn't necessarily, going to be going to a workplace and, from a certain time to a certain other time. It's a lot more fluid. And, a lot of because I'm a teacher, and a lot of my colleagues have mentioned like, oh, we wish we had like an office type show for, our job. And I'm like, I don't know if it would work the same way, because it's almost, the office is so much more about like other adult personalities clashing with yours, and kind of navigating through that. It would just be a little bit too much. I know they've tried it, at least over here they've tried it, and I think, wasn't there a show in Britain called Teachers or something?
What's that software called?
In fact, Teachers, it wasn't Ricky Gervais's not quite right. She was the one that like made it basically.
I think they have a different show.
Teachers, no, it's not that. But she had a big hand in making Teachers. So yeah, bit of a link there.
It's funny though, but in a way, it's not even the office that's the important bit. It's the people, the characters, right? Because those characters, and you could have a David Brent type, like Head Mouse's various archetypes of those characters. Because it's, as much as I love the fact that it is in the office, I honestly don't think in my heart of hearts it needed to be.
Right.
I think it's genuinely about the interactions with the people and the minutiae of those kind of interactions and the way they deal with each other and like I said before, everybody knows those types of people and has dealt with those situations. So it's more relatable based on the people than it is based on the location.
At the same time, it is very much a period piece now, because I think, with working from home and stuff, I can't see like the office as a workplace ever being what it was.
I would love to work with you in an office. I think you must be the funniest person to work with. Because I remember once he was telling me, right, that he was going through redundancy, right? And like,
I'm going to work potentially right now.
Right. For example, now he's basically, I don't know how much of this you want to talk about.
All I'm thinking about is office quotes and,
even when
turning up at an office.
Even when he's doing his consultation, like when they're doing his consultation with him,
don't make me redundant. I work twice as hard.
Cracking office jokes, and to people that don't even know their office quotes, by the way. That's the funny thing.
That is awesome.
So I just got visions of you like laughing.
Give me all through right now. I'd love to see you run this place without me. You have a new young man for one thing. They're all go mental.
Oh man, it's not even a joke though. This is genuinely,
it's like Bloody Dead Poet Society.
Yeah.
I can't help but
who wants to go for a drink with me?
I feel, if you think that you can get it, I can definitely get away with it, because this is the first time I've ever been able to talk to somebody that's actually watched the show, because everyone here, if I mention The Office, they immediately go to the American one. And so I can't, like, I even have like a coffee mug that I bring to work that's covered in stickers from Office and extras, and like the, When the Whistle Blows and Gareth Keenan Investigates and stuff like that. And nobody knows any of it. Yeah.
Extras. And extras. Open a can of worms there.
I always thought, I thought they were both pretty popular in America. In fact, they're Netflix, The Office. It's not on English Netflix anymore. We have it on Hulu.
Hulu has The Office, and Extras was on Netflix for a little while. It's not on HBO for some reason, because the Extras was an HBO BBC 2 collaboration, and it used to be on and so I have HBO Max. They don't have Extras for some reason, and it's weird because the two shows they have, especially Extras, there's certain parts that are changed. So like when I used to watch it on Netflix, it was the British one, but the DVD copy of Extras is the American version. So there's certain jokes, like when they're talking about Harry Potter, he says in the American one, he says Halle Berry, and instead of and he's like, oh, the magical kid with his glasses, he's like Halle Berry, and and I forget what the British one is.
Billy Piper.
Yeah, it's Billy Piper. Yeah.
Television, like most creative outlets, went through a revolutionary period in the late 1990s on both sides of the Atlantic. While the tried and true 2 to 3 camera studio audience or laugh track sitcom was still alive, it wasn't doing exceedingly well. Viewers were interested in hyper-realism, something that Steadicam, documentary-style programming, could provide. For example, all of the post-Seinfeld programs from that show's alums were trying out new models for sitcom storytelling, and as mentioned by my guest, Britain was experiencing a wave of quasi-reality show comedies. The Office is cut from the same cloth, but is exceptional because it represented the day-to-day experiences of the everyman so well. Word of warning, we recorded this episode on a particularly hot and humid day, and the Wi-Fi wasn't very stable, so there may be some GBH of the ears in the coming segment.
I have a question. So do you think that extras, so I have a theory that extras, especially series 2 of extras, is kind of a little bit biographical about the way The Office turned out in America. Because at the end of series 1, when he's talking about selling his script and what his script is about, it's just kind of like, oh, boss I used to know, and, workplace kind of things. It seems like Andy is sort of taking on the role of Ricky, and then the way that all the hands get involved and it turns into just the glasses and the wig and just the broad kind of comedy stuff, which I think
I can see that
is pretty broad.
I mean, I kind of thought it was more a satire of a lot of BBC comedy, when the BBC gets hold of a script, because what Ricky said to us is he's known examples of people that have made a comedy for British TV and they've watched it when it's actually come out and they've literally wept at how awful it is, because once the BBC get hold of stuff,
that's one way of looking at it. But I suppose I've never thought about the American angle. I guess it would hinge on the idea that Ricky and Steve aren't as proud of what the US office has become, right?
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to put words in their mouth or anything like that, but that's because when somebody makes something, that in this case, why did they make it? But they made The Office because they knew, it's kind of like that populist, feeling of we know what it's like to work in this kind of place, like so many of you do. So that's why we're making it, because we know you're going to find humor in it. And when making extras, that's a lot less relatable because most people aren't, working in background of, but the experience of, and so I feel like that might have been kind of their foray into show business and how things didn't turn out exactly how they expected it to when they, the script went over the Atlantic. And they touch on that. There's a program, I don't know if it ended up over there, but there was one they did for Showtime called Episodes, and it starred Matt LeBlanc from Friends as himself, but not quite himself, as a dramatized version of him. And it was 2 British writers who had a hit sitcom in England, and they would get recruited to come to America and make the same show, but for an American audience. And it goes from being about a boys' academy and their headmaster and everything like that to being a show about an ice hockey coach called Pucks. And it's the most, and they're kind of and Matt LeBlanc is tapped to be the big star of the show. And at one point he says to them, over there, you guys only have to do 6 episodes a season. He's over here. We do 22. And so not all of our episodes are going to be good. Some of them are going to be kind of duds.
And also, if you're going to have that many, it kind of has to go a bit crazy. There's no, I can forgive the American Office in a way for becoming as kind of ludicrous and sitcom-y as it did, because you could literally not watch it for 9 series of 25 episodes. There's enough exposition in the UK one to sort of to get where you need to go, right? If you were to do that length, it would just become too heavy. It would become too kind of it wouldn't be the same show, and that's, these aren't the same show, and that's the important thing that people, a lot of the first series was literally line for line, scene for scene. Once it gets into its own stride, the American Office is genuinely a great show. I really have in the series for sure, and it's a bit too wholesome, and the whole breaking of the fourth wall thing in the final series is ludicrous, and I really don't like that. But generally, pound for pound. Anyway, the thing about like extras being a kind of reflection of the American Office, I don't know. It's an interesting idea.
And I'm kind of inclined, when you look at the way his character develops over the Christmas special, the program's kind of nudging you to think, oh, narcissist. Well, okay, we're not a failed narcissist, he's a bit entitled. And maybe actually he's not that good. So I think that's kind of the message that I got from extras, but I know it's a controversial. I know a lot of people don't agree with me. So, yeah.
Yeah, because he seems to... that one, and I like that they didn't return to the, shaky camera mockumentary style for extras. I'm glad they did something totally different, traditional style dramedy type thing, and that in itself is its own kind of like referendum in a way against what they did with The Office, because by the time the extras came on, like I said before, everyone we had in this country Parks and Rec, and there's a show called Modern Family and The Middle, and it's all that same kind of thing where they all have all the characters go into a room and talk to the camera for a little while and do and it's like, by not just doing that again, it says a lot about kind of where they feel like they planted something really nice, but then too many people took from that same plant or whatever.
The trouble is,
it's quite funny.
The trouble is, it's so, I feel bad for them anyway, because Extras is genuinely on its own merit a great show, right? Really funny, very innovative, very kind of clever with the way they ape some of these celebrities and stuff. But it's kind of the second album thing, right? Because could you imagine if like the first thing you ever did in your career, the first episode of your podcast, was the best thing you're ever going to do?
Right.
Like what a millstone that would be. I mean, it's amazing to have the success of it and to have the accolades and stuff, but like, imagine going through your whole career trying to like live up to something you did 20 years ago.
I don't get it.
It must be a nightmare, because like I almost feel like this with bands. Like when you see a band that comes out and plays their first album like 30 years later, and you can tell they're just killing them to do it every time.
Yeah,
it's a very hard thing to live up to, and again, it's because The Office was so special. But yeah, honestly, Merit Extras is superb, and in a way, because Steve Merchant got to get a bit of a spotlight in that, he was the unsung hero of that show.
I love him and Barry. I just love that.
Yeah.
I've always loved it. The bumbling idiots, like the two of them. It's just, on any kind of show like that, I love when that kind of pairing takes place. And that, you're right, that's what makes the show. If it was just Andy and Maggie, it wouldn't be.
No way.
It'd be funny, but exactly. You need that. Just his face all the time, like, just kind of lost. And
also Steve was kind of such a background artist for The Office. Do you know what I mean? And he never gets the credit he deserves. Like, even when you talk to Ricky, it's all about like, he did this, he did that, and all of the TV shows and stuff. They talk about Ricky as the creator, and it's a travesty. It's like saying that Larry David wasn't involved in Seinfeld,
right?
Just because he wasn't in it. It's
right.
You know what I mean? It's
but then you got Kobe Duda, so
well,
thank God for that.
Every cloud,
yeah.
It's just been so much fun talking to you guys about this stuff, because like I said, I'm on an island here. I can't talk. I mean, you're actually on an island, but I can't chat with anybody about this one without coming across super pretentious, like, well, I only watch the British one, I don't watch the American one. And because not only because I saw it first, but because I could see the work that was put into it. It was very obvious right from the get-go. And a lot of the things that I cover on my podcast it's the same way. It's like the end result is the product of a lot of attention to detail, a lot of hard work, and not just Ricky and Steven, but all of the actors on the show too. Super convincing. Like they look like they do the part so well, and there's occasional that like the awkward humor that the American one plays on so much, but not nearly to the same extent. They really do a nice job. I love the way that, you know, everybody just works off each other, just like reality. You know, it's almost better than reality TV because of how accurate it is. And it's been wonderful being able to talk to people about it who know the quotes that I do. And, you know, not everybody, obviously. It's been fun. So I think ultimately when, you know, looking at this, and I remember Mackenzie Crook saying last year or so that, you know, The Office couldn't be made now. And I think he was alluding to some of the, you know, more like one of the things that always gets American audiences when I've shown it to my friends and stuff like that, they're like, wow, the sexual harassment, you know, like if they, in just the second episode when, you know, his friend's daughter is working there, and some of the things that I'm like, that would be, the whole office would be shut down even in 2001 in America. If anybody said something like that.
Pinchy.
Pinchy.
Pinchy would definitely get me too.
Yeah, easily.
It's true though, man. When we talked about, I think it was either that episode or the 5th episode in series 1 with the Chasers stuff, there's a lot there that nowadays through a 2022 lens, it's like, it's proper uncomfortable to watch. Like it's not, and it makes you kind of retrospectively think about how you perceived that episode when you saw it at the time. Whether it was
Gareth in retrospect, even Mackenzie said, it's gross.
But it's
stuff he comes out with.
Yeah, it's a very strange thing, man, and it makes you wonder what's next, right? In 20 years' time, what are we going to think about some of the other stuff that's happening in these episodes and on these shows? And it's very hard to kind of look back and judge yourself and what you thought about those shows when. I don't know what to say, but it was difficult. It's difficult. It's very strange.
Do it for other girls, but not for us.
Please.
Well, I appreciate you for taking the time, and I feel like Darren Lamb with the time differences because, like I said, I doing the 5 hours, and then right after this, I'm recording with somebody who is an hour ahead of me, so she's Central Time. I'm like. You're still counting up.
You're going back. You're still going up.
But it's been wonderful talking with you.
Thank you. It's nice to be invited, man. And to be honest, it's nice to. Yeah, go on. Sorry.
Oh no, go ahead.
There might be a delay on the line here a little bit.
Might have been.
Always good to speak to you, but you really should phone ahead.
No, man. It's awesome to talk to somebody that because recognizes the sort of cultural, relationship between this show and culture. And especially when that happens on the other side of the world for us, right? Because for us, it's like we struggle to tell whether it was the culture that influenced the office or the office that influenced the culture over here. So
influence that culture.
Yeah, well, indeed. But it's been a pleasure, man. Thank you.
When I visited England, it was in 2013, so well after that show, and I'd become familiar with it. And I remember we landed at Heathrow, and I saw as we were we ended up staying at a hotel in Hayes, which looked a lot like Slough and and I saw the signs for Slough.
Right next to it.
Right. It's like that same, and I was like, oh, it's like being in the office. I could picture myself and, but I kind of wonder, I was thinking about this earlier today. I'm like, did I become an Anglophile because of that show, or was I one already? I kind of forgot where that show ended up, because in the American DVD version of The Office, they actually have an insert in there to explain all of the British slang and references.
No way, really?
Right, because we don't.
You might not be an Anglophile, but if it's in you, we'll find it. I did a presentation last year at a conference, not Coventry conference, but a conference. And at the end of it, I said, I'm Eric, and you've been great. You've been the best. And of course, nobody noticed it. I'm like, you've been the best. And it was like, I love that. So.
Oh yeah, you are Eric. Just like Eric Hitchmo. I don't do that in the workplace.
I don't do that in the workplace. That's the closest I'll get to doing a British accent, because I always feel very embarrassed when I do a British accent with real British people. So I don't want to offend or anything, but I did. Who's this?
want to do that.
But yeah, anybody that's listening that enjoys The Office, the UK Office, or extras, will hopefully enjoy the podcast as well. So look it up when you get home.
I appreciate it. Have a great day, and everybody listening, thank you for listening to the EPS podcast, where everything, including The Office, the original, and I suppose the American one, is a primary source. Take care.
So what becomes of you, my love, when they have finally stripped you off the handbags and the glad rags that your granddad had to sweat so you could buy?
This is season 2 of the EPS podcast. I hope you've enjoyed listening to what you've heard so far. Full-length episodes like this one are being delivered on Thursdays, while shorter episodes, the products of my EPS Podcast Live exhibits, come out on Tuesdays. If you like what you hear, consider becoming a patron by going to patreon.com/EPS Podcast. Follow the show on social media, including YouTube and especially on Instagram. I look forward to you tuning in again to the EPS Podcast, where everything is a primary source, especially next week, which will mark the 1-year anniversary of the show. Talk to you then.